300,000 years ago, the Earth we now live on was a completely different place. No cities, no electric lights, no roads, no human voices. Only wind, howling like icy blades, sweeping across the frozen plains of Europe. Only fire, erupting from furious volcanoes in Asia, showering ash onto dead forests. And only forest, dense, dark, trackless, endless, covering most of Africa like a colossal maze. The Earth back then was not gentle. It was a crude, ancient, and merciless machine. A planet untouched by humanity. A world without a name. Global backdrop. A natural nightmare. The Ice Age was advancing, white glaciers stretching like giant claws over Europe and Asia. Then it would retreat, making way for cracked, dry grasslands and sun-scorched deserts in Africa. The climate shifted in cycles, each rotation a purge of life, a brutal reshuffling governed by nature's most ruthless rule: adapt or die. The landscapes were never still. They shifted constantly. What was a valley this morning could become a glacial lake next year, and a volcanic crater a century later. And in the heart of that chaos stood the giants. The world of giants, deer with antlers nearly 4 meters wide like tree branches stretching across the sky. Ground sloths weighing over 2 tons, moving across deserts like walking mountains. Saber-toothed cats with dagger-like fangs, hunting in packs, stalking behind brush. And somewhere, in a land carved by glaciers, deserts, and jungle, there was a small creature, fragile, no claws, no fangs, no armored skin. Yet it could make fire, share food, feel fear, and hope. That was the human. The arrival of humankind, small but never insignificant, early Homo sapiens, the first people like us, had just emerged in Africa. They had no writing, no names, no religion, no myths, no legends. But in their hands, they held sharp stones to cut meat, fire to cook, and a group structure to survive. They had never read history, but they were where history began. They didn't know where they came from, but they were taking the first steps of a species that would one day rule the planet. Earth, not a home, but a test. To humans, this planet wasn't a paradise. It was a battlefield, where small bands of people had to face lions, tusked boars, natural disasters, and relentless hunger. Nothing came easily. Nothing was given freely. And so, every evolutionary leap, every tiny discovery, every spark of fire was a victory. Today, we look back at the old Earth and call it by strange names. Ice Age, Pleistocene, Prehistory. We think of it as a world of beasts and darkness. But the truth is, we come from there. We, modern creatures with smartphones, Wi-Fi, and electric cars, still live by the instincts forged in that ancient wild. We still carry within us a faint memory of the world we once called home. The Earth of 300,000 years ago is not a fairy tale. It is the first chapter in the story called Humanity. Art 2, the giant creatures, rulers of the continents. If humanity had only just stepped onto the stage of evolution, then the giants had already taken their thrones. 300,000 years ago, every continent had its own sovereign. Not a human, but a giant creature. Real beasts whose footsteps shook the earth, whose gaze could freeze our ancestors with fear. Africa, the birthplace of humanity, and of titans. Paleolithic, the beast-wielding death scythe. Imagine a cow, but not an ordinary one. Nearly 2 meters tall, over a ton in weight, and armed with crescent-shaped horns over 2 meters long, curved like the blades of death. Paleolithic, a kind of prehistoric wild cattle, once ruled the lush grasslands of Africa. Land now roamed by gazelles and zebras. But being a herbivore didn't mean it was gentle. Paleolithic carried the ferocity of a creature that had survived among saber-toothed cats and primitive lions. Ancient cave paintings in the Sahara depict horned beasts, likely Paleolithic, It wasn't just hunted, it was revered. A symbol? A deity? Or perhaps both? Metriadochorus, the hell-tusked boar. If you think pigs are lazy and chubby, Metriadochorus will shatter that illusion. It was the ancestor of modern warthogs, but far more aggressive, larger, and with tusks twisted like power drills pointing skyward. It wasn't prey. It made predators hesitate. One charge, and even a Homo erectus could be gored through. They lived alongside humans, primates, leopards, lions, and held their own ground. Cibitherium, the four-horned warrior of the plains. Not a deer, not a giraffe. Cibitherium was a strange hybrid of both. A large body, a tall neck, more compact than giraffes, and more muscular than moose. Its most striking feature: 4 horns, 2 straight, 2 curved, part weapon, part crown. Its name means beast of Shiva. Discovered in lands where early humans worshipped gods of both destruction and creation. Cibitherium didn't just survive ice ages, it left its mark on mythology. Americas, a continent of strange loners. Macrauchenia, the trunked horse of isolation. Not an elephant, not a horse, not a tapir. Macrauchenia was a bizarre product of isolated evolution in South America. It had a horse-like body, a giraffe-like neck, and a small, strange trunk protruding from its face. Perhaps to forage, perhaps to smell, maybe both. Born on a continent long cut off, Macrauchenia had no natural rivals. But when humans crossed the Isthmus of Panama, isolation ended, and the strange beast had no place left. Nothrotheriops, the cactus-eating sloth that left memories weighing tons, legs like stone pillars, moving slowly as if through time itself. Nothrotheriops didn't live in trees like modern sloths. It walked the ground, munching cacti, crossing deserts, leaving behind its legacy, fossilized dung, in caves like Rampart in the Grand Canyon. Scientists have found coprolites, ancient feces containing cactus seeds, agave, and yucca flowers. They reveal this sloth not only survived the Ice Age, but shared the land with our ancestors in the Americas. Europe and Asia, land of darkness, ice, and saber-toothed predators. Homotherium, the tactical saber-toothed cat. It didn't hunt alone, didn't strike randomly, didn't roar like Smilodon. Homotherium, the silent predator, roamed Asia, Europe, and North America. Its fangs weren't as long as Smilodon's, but its bite was stronger, more precise, like a surgeon's scalpel. Humans encountered Homotherium. 2 predators, one with a crude spear, one with deadly fangs. Who won? No one knows. But they left claw marks in caves, slashes on bones, and fear in legend. Megalaceros, the antlered god of the grasslands. Antlers wider than a man is tall, shaped like the limbs of an ancient tree. Megalaceros wasn't just prey, it was a symbol. In Lascaux and Chauvet, early humans painted it in charcoal and red earth, not as a trophy, but as if telling a myth. The creature, with antlers stretching across the sky, may have been seen as the spirit of the forest itself. Panthera leo fossilis, the silent giant lion weighing 400 kilograms, over 3 meters long. It didn't roar like the African lion. It hunted in silence, under ancient canopies. Fossilis wasn't a cartoon king, it was a real killer. It preyed on juvenile elephants, giant deer, wild cattle, and maybe even humans. Early humans shared the same valleys. Perhaps they fled. Perhaps they fought. Perhaps they learned the deadly silence of this nighttime stalker. Oceania, a world of armored shadows. Meolania, the horned turtle with a spiked tail. Don't let the word turtle fool you. Meolania was a biological tank, a hard shell, horned skull, and a club-like tail covered in sharp spikes. It lived on Pacific islands where there were no large predators, no threats, until humans arrived with dogs, fire, and hunger, and ended millions of years of peaceful isolation. Now, only fossils remain, but every fossil is a story of a continent once guarded by giants. Paleolithic in Africa, Macrauchenia in South America, Homotherium in Eurasia. millennia on islands. Each was a heroic chapter in Earth's ancient story, where survival wasn't about beauty, but about adaptation. Today, they're gone, but they're not truly dead. They live on, in fossils, in cave art, in myth, and sometimes in our collective memory. They were lost kings, but their thrones still leave marks on the land. Part 3. Humans. Those who walked in the dark. Around 300,000 years ago, in Jebel Irhoud, a dry, stony region in Morocco, the first modern humans stepped into the world. Homo sapiens. They didn't know who they were. They didn't know what the world was. But they had something no creature had possessed before. Consciousness. They weren't strong, but they knew. These early humans had no special weapons. They had no claws like saber-toothed cats, no curving tusks like prehistoric boars, no armored shells like Meolania turtles. They weren't large, less than 1.6 meters tall, lighter than a full-grown antelope, but they knew how to make tools, stone blades, sharp points, crude hammers. They knew how to make fire from sparks, something no other species could do. They knew how to form groups, to take turns guarding, hunting, protecting children. They knew how to remember what happened, and how to tell it. Amid the thick darkness of the forest, under the cutting winds of the frozen plains, humans didn't just survive. They began to learn how to live together. Living among monsters. Imagine opening your eyes for the first time and seeing a Panthera leo fossilis lion stalking in the shadows, weighing 400 kilograms, a Metridiocaris boar charging through brush with skyward curving tusks, a Nothrotheriops ground sloth moving slowly like a mountain come to life, crushing bones underfoot, and above, predatory birds circling, ready to dive at the sight of a stray child. This wasn't science fiction. It was the real world that humans were born into. They didn't fight with muscle, but with mind. Humans didn't hunt with brute force. They hunted with strategy. A small group crouched in tall grass. One lured the prey. One waited at the trap. They read the wind, heard the footsteps, knew when to attack and when to run. They didn't always win, but they learned from failure. And more importantly, they learned from each other, something no other creature could truly do at that time. The first symbol of human thought, the handprint in the cave. In ancient caves across South Africa, North Africa, and Western Europe, human handprints still remain on the walls. Not by accident, not random. They deliberately pressed their hands against the stone, sprayed pigment around it, leaving their mark. Why? Maybe a message. Maybe a way to say, I was here. Maybe it was the first time humans realized they existed. Next to those handprints were drawings of animals, deer, cattle, lions, saber-toothed cats. Not just illustrations, they were memory, lessons for children, stories for those who didn't witness. They had no written language, but they had organized memory, and that was the beginning of history. Memory, fire, and the first sparks of belief. Humans didn't just remember what was dangerous. They began remembering what was sacred. Fire wasn't just warmth. It became a center of life, a place to gather, a place where stories began. They began to grieve the dead, to bury them, to leave stones, bones, or objects beside the body as if the soul might still need them. The first religions may have started there, when humans realized there were things greater than life and death. Today, we sit in front of screens with digital tools, talking about AI and space. But our ancestors, with nothing but fire and stone, paved the way for everything. They didn't give up, even surrounded by monsters. They didn't collapse, even without laws. They didn't stay silent, even without words. Instead, they told stories. They remembered. They shared. And because they started to speak, we have history to continue. Because they started to question, we have science to search for answers. They were us, the first ones who dared to look up at the sky and ask, who am I? Where did I come from? And will I survive tomorrow? Part 4. Legacy and Extinction. There's a strange truth in the history of life. The greater you are, the easier you vanish. The bigger you are, the more fragile you become. The mightier you appear, the more helpless you are against changes you cannot understand. The giant creatures that once ruled Earth are now nothing but fossilized bones, faded footprints in stone, and silent memories buried beneath the ground. And strangely, the one that survived was the smallest, most fragile species, humans. Extinction didn't arrive in a crash. It came like a slow fever. Climate shifted, the ice age withdrew, forests expanded, grasslands disappeared. Creatures that once lived off dry grass, cactus, or stone soils had nowhere left to stand. Forests were destroyed. Humans burned trees, took wood, and cleared land for farming. Giant tortoises lost their hiding places. Gigantopithecus apes lost their bamboo. Mass hunting spread. Herds of megalosaurus that once thundered across plains were pursued by groups of humans armed with spears, strategy, and fire. Elephants like Elephas antiquus that once walked alone through ancient forests were lured into collective traps. It wasn't a single meteor impact. It was 1,000 small cuts from climate, from the environment, and from us. The horned turtles, the ground sloths, the divine antlered deer, the giant apes, the forest elephants. Each species disappeared quietly, one by one, but their legacy lives on. In the DNA of domestic cattle, faint traces of the mighty Uro still remain, the ancestral wild ox once painted in the Lascaux caves. In ancient cave art, the antlers of Megalosaurus still rise like sacred branches, symbols of reverence, not just prey. In mythology, creatures like the Yeti, Bigfoot, the Hindu elephant gods, and forest monsters may all be fading echoes of real animals that once walked beside us. We don't remember their faces clearly, but cultural memory in stories, drawings, and stone carvings still whispers of a time when humans lived among beasts. Humans didn't win with muscle. We won because we knew how to fear, and that fear taught us to cooperate, to remember, to tell stories, and to imagine. We didn't fight alone. We had groups, we had plans, we had signals, we had language, we had history. We knew fire, we knew tools, we knew how to leave handprints, and we knew how to imagine, how to draw things that had never. When the giants vanished in silence, humans began to speak. We turned fear into legend. We turned survival into ritual. We turned life into culture. The world 300,000 years ago was no paradise. It was wild, harsh, unforgiving, but it was there. That we learned the first lessons: how to survive without being the strongest, how to remember without writing, how to build before we had houses, how to dream before anyone taught us how. Our ancestors lived face to face with death, and from that they created life. The Earth of 300,000 years ago is not just a chapter in a paleontology textbook, not just a Latin label in a lab, not just a skeleton behind glass. It is a living memory within us, in our instincts, in our dreams, in the stories told beside firelight, because it was there, in the icy winds of Europe, in the red sands of Africa, and in the first fire lit in the night, that humans began to write their history. If you believe stories like these matter, subscribe to the channel, share this video, and comment below. Which creature in this video do you think deserves to be brought back, and why? Because the more people remember, the fewer memories are lost.